Imagine yourself sitting at the edge of a sea that no longer exists, listening to waves that never reach the shore. Before you lies a surface of water so calm, like a mirror that refuses to reflect anyone's face. The wind drifts lazily above it, carrying the scent of salt and thyme, as though the air itself remembers stories too ancient to be recalled. This sea is not the one found on maps, nor part of the world humans call the present. It is the remnant of something once greater, deeper, and more alive than any ocean that came after. Beneath its calmness, there is an echo that never fades. The echo of a world drowned before time learned to count its days. You can close your eyes and imagine its beginning. A vast plain where sky and water had not yet parted, where mist hung low and the sun appeared only as a red dot behind gray clouds. In that place, the first humans walked without names, without language, guided only by a curiosity that made them look up at the heavens and ask questions without words. They did not know that the ground beneath their feet was the floor of a sea waiting to be born. The stones around them were still warm and far away. Mountains stood unsteady, like the body of a world still searching for its balance. No history recorded that time, for no hand had written, no eye yet believed it was worth remembering. All that is known of that age comes from the whispers of the earth, from layers of mud that speak in the language of sediment. Beneath the dark seabed, now hidden, researchers have found traces of villages, rounded stones that once formed house foundations, and the remains of fires extinguished thousands of years before any known tale began. Each small discovery is a letter in a sentence never finished, a fragment of a story too immense for human voices. They call it the Black Sea, but once it was not a sea. It was a vast basin filled with rivers and lakes, surrounded by green plains where ancient humans built their dwellings from wood, stone, and clay. They lived off fish from the rivers, animals that came to drink at the water's edge, and wild grains growing between the rocks. Their world was simple, yet peaceful, for the sky was still light then, not heavy with storms or lightning. Yet beneath the soil, something began to move, something unseen, unheard, felt only in dreams. At night, when fires burned by the rivers and humans slept, the earth exhaled deeply. Rivers trembled softly. Fish leaped from the water as if fleeing something unseen. People began to dream of rising waters, of a sea approaching from the direction of the sun, of a vast sound that was neither wind nor storm. When they awoke, they could not tell if it was warning or illusion. A message from the spirit world still close to the living. No one wrote a warning, no one prepared, for how could one prepare for something that had never existed before? The Black Sea did not yet exist, but it was already dreaming of itself. Deep underground, through the cracks of ancient rock, salt water began to seep slowly. There were no earthquakes, no eruptions, only small movements, nearly silent but constant. For months, perhaps years, the water searched for a path, piercing stone, swallowing roots, and finally finding a passage linking to worlds the great unknown sea to the south and the quiet basin to the north. At that moment, something irreversible began. And here is where the story begins. Between two breaths of the earth, between two realms of water, as one began to swallow the other. No one knows how long time moved after that. But history would later call it the first flood, the flood that birthed all floods to come. Before Noah, before Atlantis, before the word myth existed, the world had already lost itself beneath waves that left no name behind. That year was never recorded, not even in the oldest memories of humankind. Scholars would later guess, measuring layers of soil, searching for traces of salt within ancient rocks, trying to count backward to a time when the Black Sea was not yet a sea. They call it the age before the world knew seasons, when the line between land and water was a slow-moving illusion. In the north, layers of ice melted and trickled into silent valleys. In the south, ancient rivers, now nothing but forgotten names, carried silt and life toward a vast, nameless basin waiting in stillness. There, in what would one day be called the Black Sea, the air was once dry and the ground covered with dusty grasslands swept by western winds. People lived there, not many, but enough to light fires at night and listen to the distant hum that rose from beneath the earth. They did not know that the ground beneath their feet was the unborn floor of a sea. Their days were long and gentle. They planted wild wheat on the slopes facing the valley, dried river fish on flat stones, and shaped clay pots from the soil they gathered by the shallow streams. Each night, a soft rumble could be heard from the west, like enormous footsteps drawing closer. No one knew it was the sound of the sea seeking its path, pushing against the limits of a young earth. Occasionally, a seabird crossed the dry sky, an omen of something that did not belong so far inland. Among the children, the tale became a game. They whispered about the great water sleeping behind the mountains, waiting for its moment to awaken. The elders laughed, dismissing it as a fable of the dry season. Yet on certain nights, the ground quivered, and in the air hung a faint scent of salt that should not have been there. Life flowed through that place like a small stream between the stones of time. Nothing hurried, nothing suspected the end was near. The large rocks beside the river served as tables of existence where they crushed grains, drew faint patterns with wet sticks, perhaps symbols, perhaps prayers. A primitive dog sat near the fire, gazing toward the valley with calm eyes, as if it knew something humankind had yet to learn. There were nights when the moon appeared enormous and red, and beneath it shimmered a strange glimmer, as though water rippled far beyond where any sea should be. People began to speak softly about the west, lowering their voices as though something was listening. Inside the stone caves where they slept, faint paintings showed flowing water, boats adrift, and hands reaching below the surface. No one knew when those images were made, perhaps long before their birth, perhaps by generations already washed away. They were faint signs that the world had once taken another shape. Mornings continued as usual, greeted by gentle footsteps, children running across the dry plain, women singing as they washed pots in a river growing smaller each day. There was no sign that disaster had begun its march, only small whispers at the edge of awareness. Then one day, the wind arrived from the west, carrying a salty mist that clung to the skin. Their river began to change course, and its water turned colder. Far away, the sky seemed to fold into a gray wall, sealing the horizon. No one knew that line was not a cloud, but water climbing into the air, waiting to fall. Modern geology would call it the Black Sea flood, a moment when water from the Mediterranean burst through a low plain and drowned a vast valley in an instant. Yet for those who lived it, there were no words, no theories, only the sound of a great roaring arriving in their sleep. They did not call it catastrophe. They called it the rising of the water. For to them, land and sea were merely two faces of the same living thing. Here it all began, in a valley that was once not a sea and has never been dry again. Nothing remained of their homes, their fires, their fields, only the calm, cold seabed covering all the stories that were never told. In the weeks before the great water came, life in the valley went on as usual. The morning sun tilted softly across golden grasslands, and the air carried the scent of wild wheat not yet harvested. In the distance, the stone mounds where they lit fires appeared as tiny dots in a sea of yellow-green. Children ran, chasing their own shadows, while women pounded seeds between flat stones, preparing coarse dough for bread baked directly on the embers. By the shallow river, an old man sat staring at the stream that now barely reached his knees, remembering the days when it was full of fish and loud in the rainy season. They did not know that in a matter of days the place would vanish beneath a wave of salt water from afar. Each evening, the western sky looked strange, as though a thick mist stood upon the horizon. But they thought it was just a late seasonal storm. At night, the air grew damp. The campfire that once burned bright became hard to light, the wood feeling wet even without rain. A seabird lay stranded on the plain, feathers dull, legs trembling. The children gazed at it with wonder, for none had seen such a creature before. A dog barked once, then fell silent, waiting for something that never came. The elders grew uneasy, but said little. They believed every disturbance in nature was only a small warning, never destruction. In the middle of the night came a faint rumble from below, not like thunder, but like something moving deep beneath their feet. Some thought it was the spirit of the earth's breathing. Others said time itself had shifted. By the next morning, the river had turned murky, its color like metal. One dead fish floated by, then two, then many. The women stopped washing, staring at the water that now smelled faintly of salt. The men climbed the hills to look westward. They carried long sticks, not for hunting, but to mark the distance between land and the mist. Yet each day, when they returned, the line of fog seemed closer. It was as if the entire sky was moving toward them in silence. On the third night, a hissing wind arrived, carrying salty droplets that stung the skin. The campfire went out instantly, and they hid behind the large stones, trying to understand where the water came from. There was no storm, no rain, only sea wind appearing from nowhere. Some children cried, frightened by a long exhale-like sound from afar. A young woman gathered them close, calming them with an old song passed from her mother. It told of a boat that sailed through the air, carrying the first humans across the sky in search of land. None knew its meaning, but all felt safe listening. The moon hung like a half-closed eye, dim but watchful. A large bird flew low across the valley, a sign that something distant had changed. When morning came again, the air felt heavy. The leaves trembled without wind, cracks appeared in the ground, filling with salty water. People began to gather in the center of the valley, carrying children and what little they could. They looked west, where the gray line was no longer mist, but a moving wall of water. There were no screams, no panic, only a long silence, as if the world itself held its breath. A dog howled once, then ran east without looking back. The men exchanged glances, and one whispered that the earth had opened its eyes. The words sounded like a final prayer. When night returned, they went to sleep early, hoping the mist would be gone by morning. But the earth kept trembling softly through the night, and from afar came a sound like thousands of stones colliding beneath the sea. None knew that sound was a new gate opening, path of water that would swallow everything standing in its way. The day the water came did not begin with a storm or an earthquake, as told in the legends of their ancestors. There were no dark clouds, no lightning, only air that became too still to be called peaceful. That morning, the sun rose with a strange hue, orange-gray, as if shining through a faraway metallic fog. The men had risen earlier than usual, some climbing the highlands to check the wind, others trying to repair old boats they hadn't used in years. Those boats were once for fishing in the lake, yet for reasons unknown, they wanted to make sure they could still float. On the edge of the valley, women gazed at the trembling horizon where the sky and sea seemed to shift in a single shared breath. A stallion raged in its pen, kicking at the earth for no reason, then stopped abruptly, staring west with wide eyes. No one dared to speak loudly. The air carried an echo from something far away, deep, growing sound like the slow footsteps of something vast approaching. By midday, the wind had vanished completely. The leaves hung still, and shadows refused to move, though the sun climbed higher. A few children tried playing in the river, but found the water no longer cool. Its warmth was strange, heavy, almost alive, like flesh just taken from fire. When they scooped it with their hands, the surface left a thin, oily film behind. One child cried out, saying the water made his skin tremble faintly. Mothers pulled them away, but curiosity stayed in their eyes. In the sky, a line of black birds flew low in strange formation, as if searching for a way out of something unseen. The elders began burning incense on the stone altar, asking for protection from forces they could not name. The smoke rose slowly and hung unmoving in the air. The world seemed caught in a single second that refused to end. Then the sound came, not thunder, not wind, but the long exhale of 1,000 unseen lungs. The ground quivered softly, enough to make water in jars ripple, enough to knock birds from their nests. People looked at each other, then westward. The gray band that yesterday seemed far away was now a wall of silver moving steadily forward. They finally realized the mist was water from the sea, salt water somehow crossing the limits of their world. An old man dropped his staff and knelt, staring at the sky that now turned pale silver. No one spoke. They only watched. Within minutes, the air was full of salt and metal. Their hair grew damp, though no rain fell. Dogs howled and ran eastward. Horses broke free and fled. Some families began climbing the hills, their footsteps sounding like sand shifting on a riverbed. Children were held tight, belongings were left behind. From afar came a colossal noise, like two worlds colliding beneath the surface of the sea. Then the wind returned cold, heavy, carrying droplets that stung the skin like needles. When the wall of water finally reached the valley, there was nothing left to do. No time for prayer or regret. Only the sound of water swallowing everything in calm. Small boats once tied by the river lifted and drifted between submerged trees. Stone houses crumbled slowly as if bowing their heads. From the hilltops, the survivors could see the water surface reflecting the sky like a vast mirror. Beneath it, their valley disappeared without a sound. The water kept rising through the night. Small mountains became islands, and islands faded into lines on the horizon. The last campfire went out under the sea wind. The living huddled in silence, hearing only the soft sound of the endless tide coming from nowhere. Among them, a small child asked his mother in a whisper whether the earth was dreaming. The woman said nothing, only held him tighter while staring at the moving sea. No one knew that night marked the end of their old world, leaving behind only stories that would someday become myths for a world yet to be born. In that sunken valley, archaeologists found something that defied all earlier theories about human origins. Among layers of hardened mud lay remnants of stones arranged in complex geometric patterns, as if part of a vast collapsed structure. Their precision was too deliberate to be natural, too ancient to be attributed to any known human civilization. The stones formed a double spiral, coiling like a whirlpool, with a large depression at the center, resembling an altar with no name. Around it lay charred black wood and fragments of animal bones that could not be identified, suggesting the site had once been used for ritual or sky observation. Among the layers of sand, a small round object was discovered, made of heavily corroded metal, yet still bearing carvings of stars and waves. Some experts dismissed it as symbolic ornamentation, while others were unsettled by how the carvings matched ancient celestial maps from a time before. The sea had swallowed the plain. No evidence could prove anything, only speculation accumulating like sediment through the ages. Some researchers linked it to the prehistoric flood that transformed the Black Sea from a freshwater lake into the saltwater sea we know today. They believed that thousands of years before Egypt or Samaria arose, there had existed a society around that lake with a culture perhaps far more advanced than we imagine. But the waters rose, the sky changed, and all vanished in one unbearably long season. Now only those unreadable remnants speak without words. There are no writings, no names, only geometry remaining as a message not yet understood. It is as if that ancient world is still trying to speak, but only through forms that can be seen, not words that can be spoken. The sea keeps that secret with an inhuman patience, waiting for someone calm enough to hear the echoes from a time before time itself began. Before the flood consumed their world, the land around the Great Lake was filled with a life that moved in a rhythm almost sacred. The morning air was always damp and warm, carrying the scent of wet earth and freshly fallen leaves. Through the thin mist, silhouettes of ancient humans could be seen walking slowly along the water's edge, carrying stone vessels to collect fish trapped in the shallows. They were never in a hurry, for time to them had no shape as we know it now. Days were not counted by numbers, but by the shifting of clouds and the changing sound of the wind. In the distance lay low hills covered in long silvery grass, swaying gently like a second sea without waves. Large animals roamed there: giant deer, ancient bulls, and sometimes a wild horse with a shining black mane. The hunters observed them from afar, not with the intent to kill, but as if to remember a form of life older than their own. In the small settlement, consisting only of stone huts half buried in clay, women prepared porridge from wild seeds and roots boiled in clay pots. Smoke rose slowly, forming thin lines that nearly touched the gray sky. The laughter of children could be faintly heard amid the whispering wind, their joy echoing like a small glimpse of a future yet to come. There were no wars, no kingdoms, only a silence alive in balance. At night, they sat around dim fires, listening to stories of stars falling into the sea and mountains that could speak with rain. They believed the world belonged to no one, but was remembered by every stone and every leaf that fell. In that simplicity, they lived without ambition, without fear of tomorrow. Only one thing they knew for certain, that water was the mother of all life, and when the water spoke, humankind must remain silent. The following days flowed like still water beneath a gray sky. At the edge of the lake, the men began to notice something strange upon the surface. The small waves that once came gently now moved aimlessly, as if the wind had lost its desire to soothe the world. A seabird that usually circled far above now flew low, pecking at the water as if searching for something lost. They did not know what was changing, only that the air felt heavier, and the scent of salt slowly drifted inland, though the true sea was still several days' journey away. In the fields of silver grass, hunters heard a rumbling sound from the south. They thought it was thunder, but no flashes of light followed. The sound repeated each night, like the breath of the earth disturbed. In the clay huts, women began to close their doors with heavy stones each night, not out of fear of wild beasts, but because of the nightmares that came with sleep. They dreamed of water rising to the roofs, carrying a strange light that passed through all things. In those dreams, the sky no longer held color, only endless white. Some elders warned them not to speak the true name of the water, for to name it might awaken what slept beneath its surface. Since then, they began to call it Mother, or Liquid Light. In a simple place of offering, a black stone stood surrounded by a ring of smaller stones. There they placed wildflowers and bits of shell each morning, an offering to something they could not yet understand. There were no priests, no prayers, only a long silence deeper than any word. Among the children, a small song began to spread about, a sea that walks, about a bird that flies without a shadow. The song was soothing, yet frightening, for its melody seemed not of this world. In that silence, history moved unnoticed, slow as the mist that hides the future behind every drop of falling rain. The sky began to change without warning. The clouds, once soft and gray, grew dense and layered, like sheets of earth covering something beneath. There was no storm, no rain, only a shadow deepening slowly. The sunlight dimmed, as if the world were being filtered through a veil that muted all colors into calm shades of gray. In the valley, shepherds noticed that time felt strange. The shadows of stones no longer shifted as usual. Hours stretched endlessly, yet the sun remained unmoved. The animals grew restless, especially the wild horses that ran north for no reason, crossing rivers and never returning. At the lake's edge, fish surfaced briefly, then vanished without trace, leaving ripples that quickly faded. There was no stench, no sign of death, only a silence too perfect to be natural. People began to speak softly, as if loud voices might disturb a fragile balance. Among them, a young man working in a stone tower by the lake watched the sky every day. He drew markings in the soil with a stick, recording wind directions, cloud shapes, and changes in the water's warmth. No one knew why he did this, only that he believed the sky was trying to speak. Each night, he heard faint soundstones scraping above the clouds. Not thunder, but a heavy whisper that made his chest tremble. He once told the elders of the settlement, but they only smiled and said the earth had its own ways of remembering. On the 40th night since the changes began, strange light appeared on the horizon. Not lightning, but a slow-moving pulse, like veins of brightness creeping across the sky. Its color shifted from blue to green, then to a dull red, like buried embers. The sound from the south returned, louder now, rhythmic, like a giant heart beating underground. People lit fires outside their homes, not for warmth, but to signal to one another that they still existed. In that glow, the air felt damp, though no rain fell. Each breath carried mist, and the valley smelled faintly of iron. The children stopped singing. The song about the walking sea now sounded like something they should never have known. The old woman who planted flowers around the black stone sat awake through the night, staring at the sky without blinking. She knew something was coming, something that no prayer or stone offering could stop. When morning came, the sky was flat, a gray mirror hanging above the world. There were no birds, no wind. And in the distance, the lake began to move on its own, turning slowly, silently, as if the earth were taking a long breath for the first time in thousands of years. The vortex grew without sound, like a movement the world was not meant to notice. The lake, tranquil for centuries, now stirred with terrifying precision, forming a perfect spiral at its center. There were no waves, no splashes only, a slow rotation too deliberate for a storm, too vast for mere wind. Its surface reflected the gray sky like molten glass, and within that reflection, something moved below. People gathered along the shore, staring wordlessly, for speech had become useless in a place like this. They knew, even before it surfaced, that something was returning from a time not their own. A shadow rose from the depths. At first, it was only darkness, then slowly took the shape of an arching stone to smooth, as if carved not by hands, but by time itself. Water slid down its sides but left no trace of wetness, as though its surface rejected the world it touched. From a distance, it looked like an unfinished gate, curved, yet split at the crown. Each slow rotation of the vortex lifted it higher, revealing more of what had been buried in the lake's depths. The elder villagers knelt, not in fear, but because their bodies seemed to remember. As if an ancient memory within their blood recognized that form, reading symbols they once knew in another life. The sky above pulsed faintly. A dim light broke through the clouds, illuminating the structure, and thin glimmers appeared on its surface, like bronze long buried in silt. Some sections cracked, releasing a soft glow, like a sigh freed after millennia of restraint. The young man at the stone tower resumed his recording, hand trembling as he drew the whirlpool, the shape, the angles of reflection. He scrawled notes into the soil, realizing too late that the lake's water now moved toward the land not in waves, but as a gentle veil creeping forward, circling their feet. It was warm, like a living touch upon human skin. Several women began to weep for no reason. They claimed the water whispered not with sound, but with a vibration that spoke through the body. The words could not be understood, but their meaning felt like a call to return. A small child, no older than 5, pointed toward the center of the lake and said softly that something was calling from within. None dared reply. Birds from the north flew low, circling the vortex. Then dropped one by one, not dead, but unable to pass through the heavy air above it. They drifted down slowly and floated on the water, peaceful, as if asleep. When the sun should have risen, no light came from the east. The sky remained gray, and only the gleam from the vortex gave illumination. People realized time had stopped obeying its own rhythm. Shadows no longer moved. There was no difference between morning and night. Only the steady pulse of the whirlpool remained, carrying something from the heart of the earth toward the open world. Then, from its center, a massive bubble broke the surface, releasing a metallic sense, strange yet calming. And from it rose a pillar, faintly luminous, reaching upward as if to pierce the sky. No one knew whether it was stone, metal, or something alive. All who saw it agreed on one thing: it seemed to be awakening from a long sleep. The valley resonated softly, not with sound, but with spreading awareness, like a heart beating again after ages of silence. The water and soil quivered gently. The world felt as if it were remembering its own forgotten name. When night comes to the valley that has lost its shape, only the shadow of the moon remains above the water that moves without direction. The remnants of the city at the bottom of the sea resemble a row of tombs covered in glass. No human voices remain, only the current whispering as if repeating words that died long ago. Among the ruins, divers from a distant future would find shards of pottery, obsidian spearheads, and the shape of a table that resembled an altar. They do not know its function or who once sat there, but its shape suggests that it was used for ceremony. On certain walls deep below, symbols are carved that resemble no known writing. Their lines are curved, spiraling like water, as if mimicking the endless motion of the current. At the deepest floor, modern archaeologists believe there was once a temple dedicated to something older than the sun, darker than the night, and quieter than death. Some legends circulating around the Black Sea's coast even say that on certain nights, especially when the moon is hidden, the sound of bells can be heard from beneath the sea. The old villagers believe it is not metal, but the echo of stones collapsing and striking one another in strange currents. Others say it is a call from those who remained below, people who refuse to die and continue walking at the sea's bottom, circling their drowned city in an endless loop. They no longer have eyes, only hollow sockets that reflect dim light, like stars in a sky they can never see again. The tale changes slightly with each generation, but its heart is always the same. That the sea there is not just sit, is a grave for a world older than time itself. Some scholars attempt to explain everything with geology. They speak of shifting plates, of salt water rushing from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, turning a freshwater lake into a new ocean. They measure salinity differences, study sediments, and find evidence of a massive flood that occurred around 7,500 years ago. Yet none can explain the regular patterns in the seabed stones, nor why the city's design seems astronomically aligned. Certain pillars correspond perfectly with particular stars, visible only when the spring moon dips below the horizon. It feels too perfect for coincidence, yet too ancient for explanation. Those more attuned to unseen forces believe the flood was not mere nature. They say the waters rose not because the earth cracked, but because the sky opened. In that version, the heavens wept with unbearable sorrow, drowning the city to erase an unnamed sin. Some say the people were arrogant, others that they summoned something from the sea, and still others that they were merely victims of a world shifting beyond comprehension. No one can be sure. Every theory feels like a shadow gliding across the water's surface, clear for a moment, then gone. The nights there are quiet now. Only fishermen dare light their boats in the distance. They know the danger is not the waves, but the ancient feeling that lives beneath, as if something waits to be remembered. Sometimes their nets catch something hard and smooth, like a piece of sculpture or stone carved into a face. They throw it back without thinking, for every object brought up brings uneasy dreams. In those dreams, they see a shining city beneath the water, with towers reflecting moonlight from within, and people marching toward a stone gate that never opens. When they wake, the sea looks darker, and the wind carries a salty scent that feels like a memory that should have stayed forgotten. No map can describe the place accurately. Every modern attempt at exploration ends with inconsistent data. Sonar shows shifting shapes. Underwater cameras reveal foggy images, as if veiled in mist. One young researcher once said the sea seemed to resist being measured, like a living thing aware of being observed. His words were dismissed as poetic exaggeration, though many secretly agreed. There is something there that makes one feel small, as if standing at the edge of the world's unfinished memory. And perhaps that is exactly what it is. Beneath the calm surface of the waves lies a depth that holds the oldest silence in the world. The Black Sea, with its thick and soundless water, feels like a space between times, where the past and the present gaze at each other, but never touch. The old fishermen always say the sea dislikes being touched for too long. They tap its surface gently before setting sail, as if asking for permission. Sometimes, during long nights, they see faint lights moving slowly beneath the water, like torches carried by unseen hands. No one knows where they come from. Some believe they are natural gases trapped in ancient sediments. but others say they are souls from before history began, still searching for a way back to the surface, forever barred by the sea that closed its doors. The story of the city drowned beneath the Black Sea has been told by many names. Some call it Unarza, others Vishura, depending on the surviving tongues of legend. In one version, it was the place where humans first learned the language of numbers and stars. They watched the sky, marking the movements of the moon, trying to grasp the hidden order behind the night. But that knowledge was said to be too vast for humankind, and so the sea came to reclaim it. In another telling, it was a great trading hub connecting forgotten worlds where ships from the west and east exchanged metals, stones, and perhaps even the secret of life itself. No one knows the truth, for every story ends the same way, with water swallowing everything. In the black mud of the seabed lie layers of the past untouched by light. Every inch of soil there is like a soaked page from a book that can never be opened. Scientists exploring the bottom found the remains of trees still standing upright, buried for thousands of years without decay. They call it the underwater forest, evidence that the land was once green before the water came. Yet for those who come not as scientists but as listeners, the place feels more like a garden of souls. Each tree stands as a marker for a buried world. If one stands still enough at the shore and closes their eyes, they might feel a soft breath rising from the sea, carrying the scent of wet earth that should not exist in salt water. On certain nights, when fog arrives early and covers the entire horizon, the sea turns into a mirror for unseen things. The surface becomes perfectly still, and there appear reflections of towers and streets that no longer exist. Those who have seen it swear it is not a hallucination, but a visual echo of the past, as if the world itself briefly remembers what it once was before vanishing again. Cameras fail to capture it. The images always blur, as though wrapped in a thin film of time itself. Yet all who witness it describe the same chill that creeps from within, not from the air, but from the heart, as if something ancient inside them recognizes what they see. There is one legend older than the flood itself. It speaks not of water, but of sound. Long before the sea rose, the world fell silent for 7 days. No bird sang, no wind blew. Even the breath of humans felt heavy and trapped. On the 8th day, a deep sound came from the earth, not the sky, a hum, long and low, that made stones tremble and water rise from underground. People panicked, tried to pray, but their words went unheard. The sound grew until the sky changed color, and then the waters rose from all directions, covering the world like a black cloth pulled slowly over it. After that, nothing remained but a silence thicker than before. Now, thousands of years later, that sound sometimes returns. The oldest fishermen say, not to the ears, but to the chest, a subtle vibration that ripples through the water without cause. They stop rowing when it happens and bow their heads. Whoever dares to resist it, they say, is taken by the current to a place without a name. No one knows if it's true, but whenever the sea grows unnaturally calm, even modern ships delay their passage. Whether from fear or instinct, humanity still remembers something older than the sea itself. In the morning, before the fog fully lifted, the sea appeared as a sheet of black glass swallowing the sunlight. The air felt heavy, as if every molecule remembered something long submerged. Along the silent shore stood a great circular stone, half buried in the tide. The villagers called it the Guardian Stone, believing it to be the remnant of a gate once connecting the land to the city, now sleeping beneath the sea. There were no carvings on its surface, only faint grooves like currents fossilized into rock. At dusk, when the waves lapped softly against it, the stone emitted a low resonance that could not be heard but could be felt in the chest like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Long forgotten, yet still faintly alive. Around the stone, the sand was always colder, even in midsummer. Children who played nearby often complained that their feet felt slowly pulled downward, as if something beneath wanted them closer. The elders never scolded or warned them, only watched in silence from afar, knowing that the sea disliked fear. There was an unspoken pact between the people and the water. If one approached with calm intent, the sea would reflect their face clearly. But if one came seeking greed or answers not meant for them, the surface turned opaque, refusing to reveal anything. Modern researchers once tried to uncover the meaning behind the Guardian Stone. They brought sonar, underwater cameras, and theories of shifting continents. Their scans revealed something unusual. Beneath the stone lay a massive circular structure, a ring of megaliths arranged with perfect precision, buried in layers of ancient silt. Some sections formed geometric patterns too exact to be natural. One archaeologist whispered that it resembled an underwater observatory, a place where ancient people studied the stars through water's reflection rather than the sky itself. But the research abruptly ended. No reports were released, and the expedition disbanded without reason. The villagers merely smiled quietly, as though such things had happened many times before. The night after that final expedition, the wind vanished across the entire coast. The sea fell silent and flat as stone. Fishermen far offshore claimed to hear the faint sound of flutes from below the water. The melody was soft and repetitive, like a song not meant for human ears. They peered down and saw a silvery light swirling in circles, as if the sea itself remembered something and tried to replay it. When they returned to land, their eyes seemed distant, still gazing at something beyond words. Days later, the fish along the coast disappeared. The water grew unnaturally clear, so clear that the seafloor could be seen from the surface. There appeared what looked like a stone road, straight and narrow, partially covered in sand and ancient algae. It led toward the deep center of the sea, where the bottom suddenly dropped into an abyss. The villagers dared not approach. They stood on the shore, watching as the line of stones slowly faded beneath the returning waves. None took photos, none wrote it down. They all knew the sea only shows what it chooses, and never twice. An old man, white-haired and fog-eyed, once said that the stones and the sea speak to each other in a language beyond translation. He claimed to have dreamed of standing on the ocean floor, surrounded by tall, glass-like towers. At the top of one stood a vast spiral symbol, rotating slowly and glowing blue. In that dream, he heard many voices speaking in unison, not with words, but through vibration. He did not understand what they said, but he knew it was neither prayer nor warning. It was, as he described, a conversation without meaning, existing only so the world would not feel too silent. When morning came, the sea was normal again. Birds flew low over the waves, and children returned to play in the sand. The guardian stone stood where it always had, unchanged, though its surface looked darker, as if touched by something from beneath. Beneath it, the sea held all stories left unfinished, and humans as always waited for the next moment the water might speak again. No one knew whether what they saw was the reflection of their own thoughts or an echo from a time before the world knew time itself. The sea offered no answer, only continued its long and patient breathing, carrying the scent of salt and unfinished history. Among the submerged ruins, divers of the present age sometimes find things that feel more like messages than artifacts. A stone bowl etched with looping lines that never end. A small pebble carved into the shape of an ever-watchful eye. A fragment of a statue whose hand points toward the sky, though its face has eroded into emptiness. Each of these objects, though shattered by time, seems like part of a language no one understands anymore. In laboratories, scholars attempt to map their meanings through geometry, comparing spirals that might describe orbits or the turning of seasons. Yet the longer they study, the stronger the unease becomes, as if they are staring at something that knows far more than the humans examining it. In museums, these objects rest behind glass, tagged with careful scientific labels and bathed in soft light. But beneath that glass, something seems to gaze back. A curator once wrote in her private notes that she dreamed of water whispering through stone, and of bodiless hands trying to rewrite the past in air. She never spoke of the dream aloud, because the modern world leaves little room for what cannot be measured. Yet in that dream, the voices rising from the seafloor sounded like a slow hymn, like a prayer dragged through the current for thousands of years. Perhaps these objects are not mere relics, but markers of a warning that never reached its listener. Messages from a time drowned before words were born. On certain nights, when the Black Sea's waves move in strange rhythm, old fishermen claim to hear faint sounds beneath the surface, like stones striking one another, like someone knocking from a world sealed by water. None dare dive during those hours, for to them the sea is not merely the sea, but a living chamber of memory, holding secrets of a civilization that was never named. In the dark beneath the waves, everything that once was still waits to be remembered, even though humankind has long since stopped listening. Sometimes, when winter arrives early along the shores of the Black Sea, a thin layer of fog sinks so low that sea and sky seem to touch. In the silence suspended between them, one can sense something older than time itself. In a few remote villages that still face the sea each morning, the locals light incense and place it along the cliffs, not for gods, but for the souls they believe still sail beneath the water. They call them the Rememberers, spirits who never stop watching from the depths, guarding the memory from vanishing completely. Every year, there is a certain night when the wind ceases and the sea turns flat as glass, and on that night, the elders warn not to speak to anyone approaching from the direction of the sea, even if the face seems familiar. Ancient tales say that long ago, after the Great Flood receded, a small group of survivors lived along this coast, building shelters from the remains of stone and ship bones. They lived in fear of the sky, for they believed the sky was an eye that once cried the waters of the world. There is no definite record of them, yet in some archaeological layers, human bones were found showing strange deformities in the joints. It's as if their bodies had adapted to walking in shallow waters for years. Some researchers call it the result of environmental adaptation, but those who trust the old stories see it as proof that they were no longer like us. Deep beneath the waves, where mud and sand preserve the layers of forgotten ages, there might still rest the remnants of their homes. Walls carved with repeating wave patterns, like prayers begging the waters not to return. Yet the water always returns, for the sea never promises to remain still. In the vast stillness of the deep, every current carries echoes from a time even the sun no longer remembers. Around an ancient peninsula now eroded by waves, there are remnants of a stone structure that never fully sank, yet never fully rose. People call it the Gate of Sleep, because whenever the sun sets precisely between its two great pillars, the surrounding water turns to gold, then fades to black as if swallowing the light back. The stones are unlike the ordinary limestone found along the Black Sea coast. Mineral analysis shows a composition originating from far to the south, perhaps Anatolia, suggesting the stones were carried from elsewhere before being shaped into this gate. No one knows what the gate was built for, whether as part of a ceremony or simply as a marker of a vanished world. Yet fishermen still tell a legend that every 100 years, when the full moon rises above the waterline, a faint blue glow appears beneath the gate, like the heartbeat of the sea pulsing slowly. They believe it is not mere optical illusion or natural phosphorus, but a remnant of something more ancient. Perhaps the first fire that never went out even when the flood came. When scientists tried to study the seabed around the gate, their instruments were often disrupted by unstable magnetic fields, and sonar signals revealed circular shapes embedded deep in the sediment. Some consider it a natural formation, but those who know the old stories say the circle marks a sacred space, the place where the survivors of the Great Flood once rekindled the light of the world. On nights without stars, a soft humming can sometimes be heard coming from the direction of the sea. It cannot be explained by any machine or natural cause. Some say it is the breath of a remembering sea, or perhaps the voice of something that is not yet finished telling its story. When archaeologists tried to uncover the story behind the Gate of Sleep, they found that the seabed around it was filled with small objects that did not form naturally. There were fragments of pottery whose colors had long faded, remnants of metal covered in salt, and even pieces of stone with faint carvings resembling wave lines. Each object seemed to be a fragment of a story shattered by time. In an expedition report from 20 years ago, one diver claimed to have seen a dim circular light beneath the sand, about 30 meters below the surface. The light lasted only a few seconds before vanishing as the current shifted. When the video footage was reviewed, nothing was visible. Yet the diver swore he had not hallucinated. He described the light as an open eye, large and still, staring from a depth older than the water itself. Since that day, no one dared to dive in the same spot twice. The sea around the gate is considered calm, but its undercurrent can change suddenly, as if something pulls from within. Several small boats that ventured too close reported losing navigation systems for several minutes. When the systems returned, the crews always found themselves drifting hundreds of meters away without noticing. This phenomenon has led many modern researchers to debate whether the electromagnetic field in that area is caused by geological activity or by something science has yet to recognize. But the old people of the coast merely shrugged and say the sea has its own memory. If it refuses to be reminded, humans should stop asking. There is a strange peace whenever fog descends upon the gate, like a blanket covering something that does not wish to be disturbed. No one knows whether there are still empty chambers beneath those stones, or perhaps something waiting to be found when the world is ready to listen again to its first story. Several years after the discovery of the Gate of Sleep, a bolder theory emerged, proposed by a geologist named Dr. Elias Nader. He claimed that the stones at the bottom of the Black Sea were not merely remnants of a civilization, but part of a structure built to contain something from within the earth. According to him, the circular shape visible in sonar images was not a natural formation, but an ancient seal functioning like a pressure gate, closing a fissure that connected the Earth's crust with an empty layer beneath it. In a paper rejected by most academics, he wrote that the release of pressure from beneath the sea might have triggered climate changes thousands of years ago. He even suggested that the ancient coastal civilizations knew of the danger and built a massive structure to contain it. Yet they failed, and the Great Flood remembered in legends followed. Dr. Elias spent the rest of his life studying vibration patterns on the seabed. Convinced that the faint sounds recorded by underwater instruments were echoes of an ancient mechanism still moving, either closing or opening, he died aboard his own research vessel in quiet sleep a few miles from the gate's location. The final note in his field journal contained only one sentence. Written in nearly faded ink, "The water is speaking, but not to us." After his death, the research project was shut down and his equipment taken over by another institution. Yet the crew who had worked with him swore that the night before he died, the sea around them had become utterly still, and from the depths came a sound like a long, wordless song. No one recorded it officially, but everyone who heard it agreed it wasn't from a machine, nor from fish, nor from humans. Something vast was breathing deep beneath them, like the world remembering itself. After Dr. Elias's death, the scientific world tried to bury his story in polite silence, as if closing a window to keep an unfamiliar sound from entering. But silence could not stop the tremor rising from beneath the sea. About 2 years later, another research vessel recorded a similar anomaly in the same region, a recurring vibration pattern resembling a heartbeat. Its frequency wasn't constant, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, as if something below was adjusting its breath. Experts called it tectonic resonance, a normal geological event caused by the pressure between rock layers. Yet some crew members felt there was something else. One technician assigned to monitor underwater sensors reported that whenever the frequency peaked, he heard a faint whisper near his ear, even though he wore protective gear. He wrote down the words he thought he heard, but the note was confiscated by the Research Institute before it could be made public. Soon after, he resigned and never spoke to the media. In the fishing village, not far from the harbor where the ship docked, strange things also began to happen. For several nights in a row, the sea glowed softly, not from phosphorus or moonlight, but from a light rising out of the depths. It wasn't bright, but calm, like light from a dream. Children who stared at it too long often woke in the middle of the night with open eyes, saying they heard someone calling from underwater. The elders dismissed it as sleep disturbance, but the phenomenon spread. Fish stopped surfacing, and boats that ventured too far returned with damp planks discolored, as though the wood had absorbed something unseen. Months later, the underwater expedition was officially suspended. The stated reason was funding and safety concerns, but rumors spread among scientists that the latest data showed changes in the seafloor pattern. A formation once flat now appeared to shift slowly in an inexplicable direction. No earthquakes, no large tectonic movements, just a subtle reshaping, like something waking and stretching. In an unofficial report, a robotic diver managed to send one final image before its signal vanished. On the screen, the stones were trembling faintly, and between them pulsed a greenish light, beating like a vein. Then the feed went dark. Soon after, same institution released a statement declaring the Black Sea Research Zone off-limits to civilian exploration. The official reason was environmental protection. Yet that same night, fishermen along the coast reported hearing a low sound coming from the sea, like a long call from some vast unknown creature. It was heard only once, but enough to keep them ashore for months. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a group of young scientists began revisiting Dr. Ilias's old notes. They found an unfinished pattern coordinates forming a vast circle around the Black Sea, marking what seemed like the boundary of something sealed within. In one of his marginal notes, Dr. Ilias had written that if the ancient seal were ever broken, what would emerge would not be water or gas, but the memory of the earth long locked away. The phrase puzzled everyone. There was no scientific explanation or context surrounding it. Some took it as a metaphor for geological pressure, but others felt it hinted at something more, something waiting to be remembered. On long nights along the Black Sea coast, the old fishermen told their children stories about a time when the sea was not yet a sea, when the valleys below were still inhabited. They spoke of voices that once called from the ground before it sank. Now, they said, the voice had returned, calling from the same direction. Only those who slept with calm hearts could hear it. The coordinates the young scientists found seemed random at first, like the scattered scribbles of a man losing focus at the end of his life. Yet when they overlaid them on the geological map of the Black Sea, something startling appeared. The points formed a perfect circle, and at its center lay an area untouched by sonar or any known expedition, a vast cavity, too symmetrical to be natural. One of them, a geophysicist named Rafi, whispered, "This isn't a formation. It's a design." From that night onward, the small team worked in secret, using private servers and custom-built tools, afraid the authorities might discover what they were doing. In the recovered digital notes of Dr. Ilias, they found a 12-second video file. The footage was dim, showing only the diver's headlamp sweeping across a curved stone wall carved with faint spirals. In the final second, before freezing, Dr. Ilias's voice whispered, "It turns inward." Then the screen went dark. There was no context, no location data, only metadata showing the video had been recorded days before his disappearance. The phrase, "it turns inward," became their obsession. When they reconstructed the coordinates in 3 dimensions, they realized the pattern formed a double helix, like a strand of DNA. Only on a geological scale, spiraling across the seafloor for hundreds of kilometers. In computer simulations, the structure seemed to pulse slowly, almost as if breathing. Wild theories followed. Could the Earth store memory in physical form? Not memory as in human recollection, but energy patterns, some kind of mineral consciousness dormant within the crust. The deeper they delved, the stranger things became. Their computers froze without reason. Low-frequency tones emerged from speakers unbidden, and several team members began having identical dreams, floating underwater among slow-turning stones while an old woman's voice spoke in a forgotten tongue. One linguist among them transcribed the sounds from those dreams and compared them with the carvings in the video. The match was uncanny. The phonetic patterns resembled an undeciphered pre-Sumerian language. The team understood they were no longer studying geology, but something bridging the primeval past and humanity's future. "If this is true," Rafi said, "then the Earth isn't just our home, it's a mind that dreams." The room went silent. Beneath the beauty of the idea lurked a terrifying possibility. What if that dream was starting to wake? The next day, Rafi received an anonymous message containing additional coordinates along the Eastern Black Sea. The format was identical to Dr. Ilias's notes. Someone, somewhere, was continuing his work. The team sent an unauthorized drone to the new location. After 2 days, it reached the site and lowered its camera. What it found was staggering. A vast stone ring, like an ancient amphitheater, with a slow-spinning current at its center. As the camera approached, something appeared, a spiral of light, moving as if it were thinking. The sensors spiked, recording extreme electromagnetic fluctuations before the feed died. No sound, no data, except for one word captured by the drone's auto voice system before failure. Remember, after that, chaos. Their servers were breached, archives erased, and one member vanished. Rafi hid the final data copy on a physical drive and fled to Turkey. His last message read, "Greater than if you ever hear a voice from beneath the sea or the ground, don't answer. It's not calling, it's waking." Above, the world continued with its politics, wars, and markets. Beneath, something in the Black Sea kept pulsing. Weather satellites registered magnetic fluctuations every 23 hours, almost like breathing. On some nights, infrared photos showed faint glows tracing the shoreline. No explanation sufficed. Some said radiation. Others, who knew the story of Dr. Ilias and Rafi, whispered a different theory. The Earth's memory was sinking with time once more. Months after the last event, strange reports began emerging from the northern coast of the Black Sea. Fishermen claimed to hear a heartbeat deep within the water, steady, slow, as if something vast were sleeping below. Sometimes the sound ceased, then resumed with a different rhythm, making the sea tremble softly like a vibrating string. In the old villages along the shore, long dry wells suddenly gushed brine again, and at night faint green light hovered above the surface dim, yet enough to make dogs bark furiously. The authorities sealed off the area, citing environmental safety, but rumors spread faster than decrees. Raffi, hiding in a small Anatolian village, heard the news via amateur radio. He knew whatever pulsed beneath the sea was now rising to the surface. He tried contacting his remaining colleagues, but none replied. One, Lena, had left a voicemail weeks earlier, whispering, "I saw it in the sky, not in the sea. It has turned itself inside out." After that, her phone vanished from all networks. Raffi's days grew stranger. He began hearing low voices at night, not from outside, but within his own mind. The voice was gentle, speaking in a language too old for humanity to recall. When he tried writing it down, the words came as undulating codes, shaped like waves. Each time he heard the whisper, the compass needle spun violently, as though a massive magnetic field had shifted direction. The earth was communicating, not through speech, but through pattern. One moonless night, he walked to the shore and saw a long line of light across the horizon. Green and blue ripples rolled slowly, like the sea itself was breathing. The glow touched his face, and time seemed to pause. In that silence, an image formed in his mind, a vision of a submerged city with curved towers and streets paved with black crystal. He saw tall figures walking without shadows, touching the water as if conversing with it. Then it all vanished, leaving only the soft rush of waves. By morning, farmers discovered a circular mark in the coastal salt fields. The soil inside was scorched, yet silver moss grew around the edges, emitting a metallic scent. When examined, the moss revealed crystalline structures within its cells, as though it was trying to record light itself. No known species matched it. Researchers came, collected samples, and never reported again. 3 nights later, Raffi dreamed once more. He stood inside a vast stone chamber beneath the sea, surrounded by spiraling carvings like those in Dr. Ilias's video. At the center pulsed a sphere of light, breathing in rhythm with him. The old woman's voice returned, clearer this time. "You have remembered," she said. Now listen. From within the light came 1,000 overlapping whispers, speaking names of places unknown. Then one voice rose above the rest. It spoke his own name. Raffi awoke trembling, his mouth salty as if he had swallowed seawater. In the following weeks, similar phenomena appeared across the world. In Iceland, volcano sensors picked up a breathing sound from beneath the glaciers. In Japan, tidal waves shaped perfect spirals on windless coasts. In East Africa, ancient megaliths vibrated at midnight, emitting low, unfinished songs. Scientists were baffled, but those who knew the story of the Black Sea connected the dots. The buried layer of Earth's memory was stirring. Raffi knew it was all connected. In his last notebook, he wrote, "The sea doesn't just hold water, holds time. Every drop is a memory waiting for the right temperature to awaken." He realized this was not destruction, but restoration, a planetary process of recollection. Humanity might just be a brief pause between the Earth's long sleep and its reawakening. Still, he sensed not all layers of memory were kind. Some were older, darker, and indifferent to life. When the earth dreams, it also remembers suffering. In the night's vibration, he could hear faint warnings, not calls, but cautions that awakening does not always mean salvation. That night, as he gazed at the sea for the final time, the green light returned, swirling slowly like a colossal eye-opening after an age of darkness. After the coastal events, time began to lose its shape. People started reporting strange occurrences that no clock or calendar could explain. In some ancient towns near the Black Sea, the sun rose twice in one day, while elsewhere, night lingered for more than 20 hours. There was no pattern to predict, as though the sky was relearning how to breathe in its own rhythm. Wall clocks stopped at different hours in every house, yet people felt time flowing without direction, like water seeping through sand. Even footsteps sounded slower, and shadows moved with hesitation, as if bodies and memories no longer waited for each other. The phenomenon spread across the world. In major cities, digital screens displayed dates that never existed. December 32 or May 0. Scientists called it a temporal anomaly, a phrase that only disguised their confusion. Some proposed that vibrations from the Black Sea's depths were affecting the planet's rotation, but evidence was lacking. The world had become a broken hourglass, grains of time spilling without order. People dreamed of pasts they never lived, and upon waking, found small changes around them. Wooden chair turned to stone. A family photo showing unfamiliar faces, flowers blooming in colors unseen the day before. Amid this chaos, a small group of researchers continued working quietly. They called themselves the Archive of Time, composed of geologists, physicists, and historians who believed this was not a disaster, but a correction. The Earth, they claimed, was restoring itself, and humanity was merely witnessing the planet's own revision of history. One of them, Dr. Sellen, wrote in her diary that each temporal anomaly coincided with a surge of electromagnetic resonance from the Black Sea. She believed the sea was more than water. It was a natural memory device, storing layers of time like a vinyl record spinning back to the beginning of a song. Rafi, now living in constant movement, found Dr. Sellen's writings on a hidden forum. They echoed his own thoughts. He began rewriting his personal timeline, not to remember, but to observe what had shifted. His birth date changed in records. His mother's photo vanished from the archives, and the map of his childhood showed a different coastline. The world, he realized, was subtly rewinding itself, erasing histories misaligned with the Earth's memory. Each alteration felt like a long sigh from a planet editing its own biography. In several regions, collective memory began to fail. Villages grew silent, not because people left, but because no one remembered they existed. On digital maps, city names faded, replaced by blank white space. Some claimed they were trapped in familiar towns, but every attempt to leave led them back to where they began. Space had adopted the logic of dreams, moving only where memory allowed. Meanwhile, the sounds from the Black Sea intensified. It was no longer a heartbeat, but a sustained tone, a song repeating endlessly. On certain nights, it shattered windows. Those near the coast dreamed of the sea speaking a forgotten language. its surface forming a mouth, and words emerging as waves of light. The message was simple and chilling. What is written will be erased. What is remembered will remain. Dr. Sellen's final report came 2 days before she disappeared. In it, she noted that the deepest layers of the Black Sea emitted electromagnetic patterns resembling human brainwaves during dreams. Her conclusion was startling. The sea was dreaming, and its dream was spreading. If true, then humanity was living inside the Earth's consciousness as it reorganized its memories. She wrote, "Perhaps this is not the end of time, but the moment the Earth decides to remember itself." After that line, the journal ended. No further entries followed. In the ancient city of Varna, a group of children found a spiral-shaped stone by the river. When one of them touched it, the water's reflection began to spin. And within seconds, the entire river mirrored a sky from another era, clouds moving backward. Birds flying in reverse, waves roaring from the mountains. Witnesses could not explain it. Days later, mirrors around the world reflected scenes that did not exist. Shadows appeared without bodies, and clocks everywhere froze at 3:11. At that moment, humanity began to understand that time was no longer something measured, but something being remembered. The Black Sea became the center of resonance, each pulse carrying echoes of the past across the land. Cities sank in dim light, not blinding, but aged, as though the entire world was becoming an old photograph. No one knew when it began, and fewer still knew if it would ever end. The world had become an archive, writing itself, and humanity stood silently between unfinished pages of time. When humanity finally realized that the Earth was remembering itself, the transformation was no longer confined to memory. It spread into matter. Walls of old cities changed texture. Brick turned to sand. Steel softened like wax. Trees grew overnight, roots tearing through asphalt, reclaiming the ground. Skyscrapers aged in days, glass blooming with moss, metal rusting, and logos fading into indecipherable symbols. The world seemed to rewind into an earlier version of itself, as though the planet was performing a geological reenactment of its own origin story. Rafi stood atop a crumbling apartment building on the edge of Istanbul, watching the Black Sea shimmer faintly like an open eye in the distance. The wind carried whispers that could not be explained, neither human nor animal, but something older. The land was shifting. Hills reformed, coastlines stretched, rivers sought new paths. Each night he filled his worn notebook, trying to trace a rhythm in the chaos. Yet the words he wrote refused to stay still. Sentences changed languages by morning, as if the earth itself was authoring his thoughts. In the surviving cities, people created crude systems of survival. They painted sign circles, waves, and suns on walls to mark places that remained fixed. These symbols became anchors, regions where memories seemed stable. Stepping beyond them often led to loops in time. Some returned to the same morning, others skipped directly to dusk. A few lost their physical form altogether, their faces shifting slowly to fit the world's new narrative. During his travels, Rafi met a group calling themselves the Shadow Keepers. They believed the Earth rebuilt its history from human memory, and those forgotten would vanish. They wrote old stories on walls not from nostalgia, but to resist erasure. As long as something is written, said their leader, a woman named Amara, the world believes it exists. Together, they recorded lost tales, cities erased, extinct tongues, constellations awaiting return. They thought of themselves as gentle collaborators in the Earth's recollection. Others, however, embraced the dissolution. A sect calling themselves the Children of the Sea saw the erasure as a summons to return home to the ocean, the original memory of life. They abandoned cities for the coast, seeking to merge with the water's consciousness. Many disappeared. Fishermen swore they saw figures walking upon the sea at night, faces blank, singing in rhythm with the earth's pulse. Objects, too, began to remember their origins. Stone reverted to raw mineral, iron to dust, books faded into blank pages. Yet ancient manuscripts grew darker and more legible, as if welcomed back by time. Scientists labeled this material reversion, but most agreed it was simply the Earth refusing what did not belong to its true memory. One night, Raffi noticed the stars had shifted. The constellations no longer matched any known chart. They now formed a spiral, the same pattern found on the stone discovered in Varna. He realized the spiral was no coincidence. It was the geometry of all growth, from seashells to galaxies. The planet was not dying yet, was returning to its center, the first spiral, the origin of memory itself. Dr. Selen had once written that if the Earth dreamed, then all life was a part of its subconscious narrative. Now, Raffi could feel it. Touching the ground, he sensed a deep, slow breathing beneath. This was not apocalypse, but awakening. The world was remembering itself before language, before names, before stories, when existence was only pulse. At season's end, the Black Sea turned silver. The water stilled, reflecting nothing but light. Survivors gathered by the shore and saw beneath the surface another city, familiar yet younger. Flawless, like the memory of a world waiting to replace the current one. Then, on a long night, the line between sky and sea dissolved. The planet folded upon itself, two realities merging into one, and everything fell silent. No one knows what followed. Some say humanity crossed into a restructured layer of time, living within the Earth's rewritten dream. Others believe all returned to the depths, absorbed into the planet's perfect recollection. Raffi's final entry, found in a half-burned notebook, read, "If the world is a dreaming memory, then every human is a sentence within its hand. Now, the Earth is reading itself again from the beginning." Morning arrived without color, as if light itself had yet to decide its form. The sky above the Black Sea looked like a pane of gray glass, reflecting faint faces from an age no one could name. The wind carried a mixture of salt and ancient dust, a scent older than memory. There were no birds, no waves, only a silence so deep it seemed to echo from within the chest. Along the shore, sand had turned to smooth stone, and beneath it, faint glowing lines formed what looked like forgotten script. Raffi wandered without direction, waiting for the world to decide whether he still belonged in its story or had become a margin note erased by time. He stopped near a broken pier that leaned toward the sea. In the distance, beneath the surface, he saw something strange. the shadow of a city he once knew. Floating upside down, its towers glowing softly like bioluminescent coral. The sight rippled with each movement of the waves. And his own reflection changed to his face, morphing into someone else, perhaps a version of himself from before history began. He bent down and picked up what looked like a fragment of glass, but when he held it to the light, he saw moving images within. People walked along the same shore thousands of years earlier, dressed in woven garments, carrying clay jars, speaking in a musical tongue. The fragment, he realized, was a shard of time. The earth was peeling back its layers, revealing the scenes beneath. Every grain of sand, every stone, contained a tiny moment that now whispered its way back into being. Farther along the coast, he found the remains of a structure still standing. Its walls were carved with spirals and water symbols, far more intricate than the ones on the Varna stones. The carvings resembled currents, circling a central point, perhaps a map leading to the drowned heart of an ancient civilization. At the center stood a large circular stone with an eye carved upon it, and beneath that, a phrase that changed form each time he looked. When he closed his eyes, a voice seemed to speak from within his mind. "We are not lost. We are only sleeping within time." Days passed without clear sunlight. The light came from everywhere at once, and shadows no longer pointed in any direction. On the horizon, the sea divided into two colors, blue and silver, as though two dimensions had met but refused to blend. He walked along that narrow divide, feeling the world thin around him, almost transparent. Beneath the surface, he could see shapes mountains, and something vast moving slowly within them. It was not fish or man, but a figure tracing circles of light upon the ocean floor. Each motion sent ripples upward through the air, making the sky itself quiver. He could no longer tell if he was witnessing the past, the future, or the continuation of the Earth's dream. All he knew was that he had not yet been erased. His shadow still fell behind him. His heartbeat still pulsed in rhythm with the silent wind. And in that stillness, he felt peace not born of hope, but of surrender. The world no longer needed witnesses. Nature was telling its own story now, finding rhythm not through thought, but through the subtle tremor of existence itself. That night, the sky turned violet blue, and the stars rearranged themselves into new patterns, flowing with the ocean currents below. Sky and sea had finally agreed to mirror each other. From afar came a soft song, carried by the era song of the children of the sea, now one with the water. It had no words, only tones that vibrated like a long, gentle breath. When dawn returned at last, Rafi began a new notebook, for the old one was gone with the old world. His hand trembled as he wrote, not from fear, but from awe at how fragile words had become. He wrote only one line, "I am still here, and the earth has not finished dreaming." Then he closed the book and left it on a stone, knowing the world was now writing itself. On the day the sea grew still, the horizon changed. A vast shadow emerged, at first like thickening fog, then gradually forming the outline of land. Those who lived along the Black Sea shore thought it a mirage born of heat and mist, yet the shape did not fade. It grew clearer each hour, revealing a great island with jagged coasts and smoke-like clouds rolling from within. No ship dared to approach, for the water around it swirled gently as if the earth itself held its breath. By twilight, the land had fully surfaced. There was no eruption, no storm, only the slow, deliberate rise of something ancient returning to the light. The island's surface shone black and glassy, like obsidian absorbing the last traces of day. Along its coast stood crystalline formations reflecting the sky so that the whole place gleamed like a shattered mirror. People began to call it the island that returned, though no record of it existed. Somehow everyone felt they had once heard its story as children, half remembered from a forgotten lullaby. Raffi watched from a high cliff. He felt a faint tremor beneath his feet, not danger, but a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. He descended the rocky path toward the shore, the air thick with drifting light particles that swayed through the mist. A soft murmur echoed from the water, not the voice of waves, but something older, speaking through the sea itself. The words were beyond language, yet their meaning pulsed in his chest like a silent understanding. When his feet touched the sand, the waves paused, as if acknowledging him. The water before him quivered and slowly parted, revealing a shallow passage leading toward the new land. He stepped forward, leaving glowing footprints that faded after a moment. Above the surface shimmered faint outlines of trees without leaves, branches of light waving gently, welcoming him. The world was remaking itself, not from memory, but from its own imagination. The ground was warm beneath his bare feet, though the air was cool. In the distance stood a tower-like structure, but as he approached, he saw it was not built, but grown from stone, spiraling upward. Within it flowed silvery water that whispered like breathing. Nearby stood stones marked with carvings, the same water spirals found at Varna, only now glowing from within. On one stone, his reflection appeared older, calmer, as if he were seeing the version of himself that time had yet to reach. The sky turned dark blue with threads of green light. From the clouds fell strange rain, not water, but luminous ash that glowed upon contact with skin, tracing faint lines like veins of light beneath it. The same patterns spread across the land, linking stone to soil, to air in one vast web of slow, pulsing energy. In that dim radiance, Raffi understood the world was rewriting itself, and he was witnessing the first page of a story with no author. Night fell, but did not bring darkness. The island glowed softly from within, lit by the quiet breath of the earth. Behind him, faint figures emerged from the forest of crystal. They were not human, though shaped like men. Their bodies were translucent, their eyes slow-turning circles of silver. They watched him not with fear or hostility, but recognition. One raised its hand, and the air pulsed gently with light. There was no sound, yet Raffi felt their message clearly. They knew him. He was not separate from them, but part of what had long been waiting to return. Time ceased to matter. The island breathed, the sky rotated, the sea shimmered, and the earth beneath him hummed. The boundary between the old world and the new had dissolved. There was only continuity, a song that never ended, only shifted in tone. He closed his eyes and heard a voice rising from within himself, quiet and certain. We are not witnesses. We are the echoes of what has never ended. The next morning, the air above the island felt different. There were no sounds of birds or insects, only a soft whisper that came from all directions, like the wind trying to remember something. A thin mist covered the ground, and behind it, colors began to appear. Colors began to appear the eye had ever seen. Green that pulsed, blue that seemed to flow, violet that breathed gently, as if the newborn world was learning to recognize itself. From cracks in the black rocks grew small living things, shaped like plants, yet moving, opening and closing transparent petals that emitted soft light. When the wind passed through them, they trembled and released faint notes, creating a calm harmony that made even the surrounding sea ripple in response. Rafi walked slowly along the shore and noticed that his footprints no longer vanished as before. Behind him, the sand turned crystalline, holding patterns of light. He stopped and saw that the marks formed interlocking circles, changing with every movement he made, as if the ground itself was writing his path in a language known only to this island. In the distance, the surface of the sea reflected shadows that were not entirely of the sky-vague outlines of towers, domes, and bridges rising and sinking, as if a city beneath the water was awakening from its long sleep. Staring deeper, Rafi saw another being at the water's edge. It was tall and slender, its skin bronze with glowing lines flowing along its body. Its face had no eyes or mouth, only a smooth surface shimmering gently. The being stood motionless, facing the sea, both hands raised slowly, and the water around it vibrated into the same spiral pattern carved on ancient stones. It did not look at him, did not move toward him. It simply stood there, as though praying to something older than the world itself. Rafi wished to approach, but his body refused, as if the ground itself knew when to remain still. Light rain began again, softer this time. Each droplet that touched the earth turned into a tiny glowing flower that bloomed and faded like breath. These flowers had no ordinary petals, only thin membranes that caught the reflection of the sky and changed color each second. Among them, transparent insects drifted slowly, their wings tracing luminous trails in the air. They made no sound, only movement so gentle it was barely visible. Rafi thought perhaps this was how the world first learned to breathe after the great flood and silence filled with understanding. As he walked further inland, he felt the boundary between living and non-living blur. Stones seemed to pulse, the sand shivered, and the air carried a metallic scent that was strange yet soothing. He found a small river whose water looked like liquid glass. Beneath its surface, tiny shapes moved slowly, fish-like, but more like shards of light made sentient. When Rafi bent to look closer, his reflection appeared, but it was not his own. The face smiled gently, then disappeared. At the island's center was a circular plain free of any vegetation. Its surface was smooth as polished stone, and in its middle stood something like a pillar. It was neither stone nor metal, nor did it seem crafted by hand. It appeared to have grown from the earth, lined with glowing veins that pulsed beneath its skin. As Rafi approached, a soft sound began again, clearer this time. It was not in any language he knew, but its rhythm carried the tone of a low song that filled the air. He closed his eyes and listened, and within the tones he felt something, not a message, but a memory. The island was telling its story through sound. The memory arrived as vision, water rising from a vast valley, swallowing land slowly, light moving beneath the sea. Cities vanishing without screams, leaving only endless ripples in restless water. Beneath the seabed, great stone structures lay buried for ages, until the weary earth exhaled them once more. He saw figures like shadows walking through the ruins, carrying light in their hands. They were not alive, yet not dead spirits from before history began. When he opened his eyes, the pillar now glowed bright, and the ground around him shimmered in reply. He felt a tremor in his chest, not fear, but resonance. Everything around him, from the air to the stone, seemed to recognize each other, realizing they were parts of the same body. The world, he thought, was not being created again. 'Twas remembering itself. And perhaps humanity was only the faint echo of that memory, returned to listen to a story that had never ended. As night slowly descended over the island, the light of the pillar dimmed into a soft glow that seemed to breathe with the earth. Raffi sat beside it, his eyes fixed on the ground that was beginning to change color. He felt that the island was not still, was listening. Every step, every breath became part of a long symphony played by the world itself. Yet tonight was different. From a fine crack near the pillar, a golden light emerged. Unlike the glow of the flowers or the reflection of the sea, this light had direction. As if it was calling, Raffi moved closer, feeling a faint warmth rising from within the crack. And when he cleared away a few stones, he found something unimaginable. Beneath a thin layer of soil lay a staircase, a spiral stone staircase leading down into darkness. Each step was engraved with circular patterns filled with fine silver blue sand. He peered into the depth and heard a low hum, like the vibration of air in a vast hollow chamber. There was no fear, only the desire to know. He lit a small torch and began his descent. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that the walls surrounding him were not ordinary stone. Their surface was smooth like glass, yet pulsed gently as if he was walking through the veins of a sleeping creature. After about 20 steps, he reached a wide chamber lit by the glow of its own walls. The room was circular, and in its center lay a shallow pool of clear water. On the pool's floor were large stones forming a symbol that looked like an open eye. Floating just above the water was a golden sphere of light, slowly rotating in silence. Raffi froze, staring at it. The sphere felt alive, aware of his presence. As he moved closer, it flared brighter, and the entire chamber trembled softly. He knelt and touched the water, and immediately images rippled across its surface. Not his reflection, but glimpses of a past mirrored in the water. He saw vast green lands, clear rivers, and people wearing strange silver garments that shimmered under the sun. They did not speak, only gazed at each other, and in their midst stood a tall black stone tower carved with the same spiraling patterns found on this island. At its peak rested a sphere of light identical to the one before him. He realized then that this was not merely a source of light, but a relic that was once revered, guarded, perhaps even lived by the lost civilization. In the water, he saw the flood arrive. Thick clouds rolled, the ground shook, and the sea rose, devouring valleys and cities. The people ran, but not in panic. They carried the orbs of light from their towers, lowering them into the sea one by one, like planting seeds. The lights sank slowly, and when the last vanished beneath the waves, the ocean shimmered briefly before returning to darkness. The vision faded, leaving only calm water. Raffi remained crouched, his heart heavy and slow, as though he had witnessed a secret not meant to be seen. He looked again at the glowing sphere. Now he understood was no artifact, no remnant of stone. It was the living residue of something that once governed the rhythm of the earth. A consciousness preserved in its simplest form, light. He raised his hand, reaching toward it, and for a moment the world around him disappeared. Shapes beyond description appeared, lines of light forming endless geometry, and a hum that was not sound but pure vibration touching his thoughts. Within it came faint words. They did not leave. They are waiting. When he withdrew his hand, the sphere slowly dimmed and descended to the pool. The water rippled, then stilled as the light sank out of sight. Raffi stood there for a long time, trying to understand what he had just seen. The world was quiet again, but not empty. It was a silence full of meaning, like a breath held between two heartbeats. He knew that above, the island was still alive, still listening. And now he knew that deep beneath the sea, in the buried heart of the world, lights like this one waited to be found again one by one. Among the ruins of the sunken city, there emerged one discovery more peculiar than all the others found beneath the sea. A round stone, almost perfectly shaped, with a spiral line twisting around its surface like the carving of time itself. The first divers who found it called it the Eye of the Sea, because when light struck it, the stone reflected a living blue glow. It was unknown whether the object was crafted by human hands or born from an extraordinarily strange natural process. Yet in the way its lines intertwined and coiled, there was something resembling thought, as if the sea had preserved the memory of a form created to observe. Across its surface were symbols that looked like writing, too delicate to have been carved with stone tools. Each line was barely visible, as though written by a being that did not require hands. The stone was brought to the surface and taken to a small coastal laboratory, where researchers observed that it remained damp even after days away from the water. At night, the stone emitted a faint hum like the low breath of the earth. Some claimed the sound came from the resonance of rare minerals. Others whispered that it was an echo from those who had vanished. In the tales of old fishermen, it was said that before the Great Flood, the people around the Black Sea already knew of this object and worshipped it as a sign of great change. They believed that when the stone spoke, the sea would rise and swallow the land. Since its rediscovery, storms had become more frequent. The winds turned in strange directions, and the deep currents shifted as if something beneath was beginning to move. No one knew whether this was coincidence or part of a pattern that had unfolded thousands of years before. The sea remained silent, yet each night it whispered the same sound, reaching through time to those willing to listen. As the nights grew longer and the sea cooled, the stone began to display another change that unsettled the researchers. Its surface now revealed tiny points of light that moved slowly, like little stars dancing beneath its skin. No instrument could explain the phenomenon, for the light emitted no heat, no reflection, and could not be captured by any camera. One scientist noted that when a person sat near the stone long enough, they began to hear faint voices in their mind, like a conversation taking place underwater. The voice spoke in no known language, yet carried a feeling calm, cold, and impossibly ancient. Some described it as a vibration that made the heart tremble without reason. The stone was placed in a sealed chamber for safety, yet even behind steel walls, its low hum could still be felt, crawling through the floor and into the bones. Outside the laboratory, fish began to vanish from the shore, and seabirds refused to fly near. Only small waves came, without direction, carrying a stronger scent of salt than before. On the fourth day, one of the divers from the original discovery suddenly disappeared. He was last seen standing on the beach, staring at the sea as if listening to something. Hours later, the stone ceased to glow, and all sound faded. In that long silence came a sense that the sea was waiting. The remaining scientists feared to touch the object again. They wrote their final report in vague sentences, as if unwilling to fully reveal what had occurred. They described the stone not as an artifact, but as a marker or remnant message from a civilization that knew the sea was not just water, but memory. The following night, the wind reversed direction, and waves arrived without a sound. In the sky, there were fewer stars, as if they too chose to stay away from whatever was awakening in the deep. Months later, the laboratory by the Black Sea became a quiet and forbidden place. The guard stationed there reported that every midnight, a long humming sound could be heard from underground, though all monitoring instruments showed no seismic activity. Among the hum, there were faint echoes resembling singing, very soft, as if rising from the bottom of the sea. No one dared to listen too long, for those who tried to record its frequency experienced strange dreams the following night. They dreamed of an endless sea, with gentle light beneath the surface resembling a sunken city, filled with glowing towers and streets. In that dream, figures walked without shadows, holding crystal-like orbs against their chests. When they turned, their faces became waves. One guard, unable to bear the pressure of those dreams, resigned and left a short note in the logbook. He wrote that he believed the stone was not of this earth, but of something that existed before the world itself formed. The note was confiscated, yet copies of it circulated among the staff like a secret that must never be spoken aloud. Outside, storms that were once rare began to appear more frequently, and the underwater currents shifted direction without reason. Satellites recorded a large circular pattern in the surrounding waters, like a vortex that did not move, and at its center was a temperature warmer than its surroundings. The researchers called the phenomenon the Eye of the Sea because its shape resembled an iris gazing straight upward, as if observing the land. An old oceanographer wrote in his report that the sea has never truly been silent. And perhaps, for entities older than mankind, water is the oldest form of communication. No one responded to his writing, but a few days later, he was found at the pier. staring at the water without expression, as if speaking to something unseen. He said only one sentence before being taken away. The sea has begun to remember again. In the following autumn, several research vessels sent to the area of the vortex never returned. The last ship to send a signal reported that the seawater had turned silvery, shimmering like liquid metal beneath the moon. They managed to transmit sonar recordings before communication was lost. In those recordings, silhouettes of massive underwater structures appeared, resembling pillars interconnected in a circular formation, as if the city had indeed existed and was now awakening from a long slumber. Scientists on land debated whether it was a natural geological formation or remnants of an ancient civilization, never recorded in history. An archaeologist from Istanbul studying stone fragments from the seabed discovered spiral carvings identical to symbols found in the caves of Cappadocia, thousands of kilometers away. In his notes, he wrote that the symbol might not be mere decoration, but part of a communication system utilizing sound resonance, a form of language dependent on the vibration of water and air. Yet shortly after his report was sent, the archaeologist disappeared during his journey to the research site. His car was found at the edge of a cliff, the door open, the seat empty. In the trunk lay a single strange object, a handful of sea sand, still wet after several days. Some began to believe that the Black Sea guarded something that did not wish to be rediscovered, as if every attempt to understand it was answered by erasure. The remaining researchers chose to cease their investigations and return inland, carrying an unexplainable feeling as though they had seen something that should not be remembered. Nights along the coast grew colder and more silent, broken only by the crash of waves whose rhythm now seemed unnatural, like a great heart beating beneath the sea, slow but steady. In that stillness, some local villagers claimed to see flashes of blue light on the horizon, moving slowly like a deep breath. They called it the breath of the old sea, a sign that something was awakening beneath the forgotten surface of the world. Winter came early that year, bringing a fog that never fully lifted from the surface of the sea. During the day, the sky stretched like an endless sheet of gray, and the water turned pitch black, reflecting the mist as faint faces staring upward from below. Fishermen stopped going out to sea, as their nets often returned torn for no reason, as though snagged on something moving deep beneath. Some nights, strange sounds echoed from the east, not wind or waves, but something like a distant chorus rising from the depths. The coastal villagers lit fires on the beach, not for warmth, but to reassure themselves they still belonged to the same world. An old woman said the sea was remembering something it had lost, and that memory was too vast for humans to bear. She sat by the shore every night, whispering names no one else knew, perhaps names from before history itself. By the third week of that month, the fog began to glow faintly, a silvery blue hue that seemed alive, flowing slowly like blood through the earth's veins. Those living too close to the shore began to dream strange dreams of a city beneath the sea, with winding streets and towers of black stone that resonated like instruments. In those dreams, they heard the echo of their own footsteps, though each echo sounded older than the step that caused it, as if time there ran backward. Some who dreamed too long began to speak in languages unknown, words rolling like waves, dissolving before they could be understood. They did not appear mad, only as though they had returned from somewhere that could not be explained. Each time the fog thickened to its heaviest, the singing from the sea grew clearest, a call without direction. People stopped trying to interpret it and simply listened, for between those sounds was a long silence that felt like the world itself breathing again, a breath once lost, now slowly returning. When the fog finally reached the land, it did not come like a storm or a rain. It crept slowly from the shore, enveloping forests and fields, seeping into the cracks of abandoned houses. The air grew heavier. Every breath seemed to carry something old and strange, a scent from another world woven into the wind. No one knew when the sea ceased to be the sea, or when the land began to lose its shape. By morning, the horizon had vanished, as if the world had folded itself inward for a while. The birds stopped singing, animals no longer crossed the paths, and even time itself seemed to hold its breath. Amid the stillness, the only sound left was the faint drip of water from the trees, marking a new rhythm for a changing world. The remaining villagers gathered together on higher ground, forming a circle, and lighting a great fire, not to fight the cold, but to keep their memories from dissolving into the mist. They spoke softly, afraid their voices might shatter the fragile balance that had settled over everything. A child asked why the sea had risen onto the land, and an elder replied, "The sea is only searching for its old boundary." Perhaps the world was once a single whole, and now it merely tries to remember its original shape. At night, strange lights began to appear within the fog, shifting like beings searching for something lost. Sometimes the light circled around people, and when it brushed their skin, there was a deep warmth, as though touched by a forgotten childhood memory. No one knew whether the fog had come to bring new life or to erase the remnants of the old. Yet within that long silence that cloaked the night, the world seemed to be rewriting itself, in a language that could not be read, only felt. A few days after the fog came, the sea and the land could no longer be told apart. Boats that once sailed along the shoreline now floated among trees, and beneath the clear water faint outlines of rooftops. Stone roads and fragments of temples with forgotten names could still be seen. Time seemed frozen, as if each second spun in place, never truly passing. The survivors began carving marks on high rocks, drawing circles and lines, hoping those traces might be read by whoever came after them. They did not write to be remembered, but so the world would know that humans once looked upon the fog and did not flee. At night, a pale blue light glowed beneath the water, like another city alive on the ocean floor, pulsing gently as if calling out. Some believed they were the spirits of the drowned, building a new realm below. Others said it was not human souls at all, but the earth's own memory reshaping itself, restoring what had long been forgotten into its original balance. Sometimes, when the mist thinned for a brief moment, they could see a towering silhouette rising from the center of the new sea. It was unclear whether it was the ruin of an ancient structure or something newly born from the union of water and time. Whenever the sun tried to pierce the fog, its rays fractured into thousands of shards, dancing on the water like broken glass, making the world look like a cracked mirror still somehow beautiful. In that silence, no one asked when things would return to what they once were. For they began to understand that perhaps this was the world's true form, ever changing, ever forgetting, always reborn from the remnants of itself. On a morning that could no longer be called bright, a small child was found on the hillside that had once been a harbor. He sat still, holding a piece of wood that might have once been part of a boat, and the soft light from the gray sky reflected on his face. The people who found him had no idea where he came from, for all the nearby villages had vanished beneath the water. The child did not speak. He only gazed toward the sea that was slowly swallowing the land. Some believed he was the lone survivor of a lost family of sailors, while others whispered that perhaps he was not human at all, but part of the story the earth refused to forget. They placed him in a small house on the slope, where the wind carried the sound of waves every night. There, the boy began to draw on the walls using charcoal and powdered limestone. He drew circles, spirals, and creatures with long bodies like serpents but with human faces. Whenever asked what they meant, he merely pointed toward the sea, as if every answer had sunk beneath the waves. Over time, the drawings multiplied until every wall was covered in symbols and shapes no one could recognize. Yet the people began to sense something strange. For at night, from behind those walls came the faint sound of rushing water and a slow beating that felt like the heart of the earth. No one dared to erase the drawings, fearing they might erase the memory of something far older than themselves. The sea below the hill grew darker in color, shifting from blue to ink black. Each morning, the child stood on the cliff, staring at the horizon, as if waiting for something they all knew would never come, yet had never truly left. Years passed, and the small house on the hillside became a kind of shrine for those who still remembered the time before the sea swallowed the world. The remaining fishermen would come carrying salt and grains, placing them before the door without knocking, then leaving without a word. They believed the child who lived there was no longer a child, but the keeper of the boundary between what had sunk and what still clung to the surface. Those brave enough to approach claimed he never aged. His hair stayed black as coal, his eyes as hollow as the beginning of time. On the walls of his house, new drawings appeared without anyone seeing the hand that made them. The shapes grew more intricate, resembling maps of a world that had never existed, their lines spiraling inward toward a single center. As if all things eventually returned to the same origin. One night, a strange light emanated from within the house, soft and pulsing like breath. Those who watched from afar said the sea trembled in response, and from the depths came a sound like an ancient song. There were no words in that melody, only a gentle harmony that made the chest feel heavy and the eyes grow drowsy. The next morning, the house was empty. The walls were clean, not a single drawing remained, and in the center of the floor lay a small stone, wet as though freshly lifted from the seabed. The child was never seen again. Yet since that day, fishermen sometimes heard the laughter of a child amid storms, accompanied by flashes of light moving beneath the waves. They knew something still lived there, among the waters that carried the stories of a nearly forgotten world. From then on, the sea before the hill was never entirely calm, as though it remembered something that could not be told in words. Over time, new villages grew upon land that had once been the seafloor. People came with boats, built homes from coral stones, and planted trees in the salty earth that slowly healed itself. They lived peacefully, but never felt entirely safe. At night, when the wind blew from the direction of the sea, whispers echoed among the trees as if the ocean were calling the names of those long lost. Sometimes, children dreamed of walking on the seabed, seeing cities made of light trembling in the distance, and when they awoke, their feet were wet, though no rain had fallen. Their parents took it as a sign, though they did not know whether it was good or ill. Whenever a storm approached, they lit torches along the shore, not to ward off danger, but to honor something older than their own memory. Deep within, they still believed the sea held the secret of humanity's beginning, that each wave carried remnants of stories from a world far wider than the one they now knew. Sometimes, when waves broke softly among the rocks, they saw large shadows beneath the surface, moving slowly as if waiting for the moment to rise again. Some said it was only an illusion of light, a trick of weary eyes. But others swore they saw eyes glowing from those depths, the same eyes as the child from the house on the hillside. No one dared to dive to find out. They simply gazed at the sea in silence, accepting that not every mystery was meant to be explained. From then on, fishermen's songs always carried a soft, minor tone, like prayers for something that still breathed beneath the world. They lived in something that did not wish to be forgotten, but also did not wish to be remembered too clearly. In the following season, the sea began to recede farther than usual. The shoreline slowly changed, revealing great stones that had long been hidden beneath the waves. Among those stones appeared carvings resembling spirals and intersecting lines, like a map from a time that had never been recorded. The fishermen who found them stood for a long time, uncertain whether they were seeing the relics of their ancestors or something left by non-human hands. When night came and the moon reflected on the surface of the water, the patterns glowed faintly, as if reminding the world that time was not a straight line, but a circle that endlessly returned. Some villagers grew uneasy. They dreamed of an undersea world waiting to be awakened, of voices from the deep offering knowledge at a price no human could afford. A few left the village without farewell, walking toward the mountains as though to flee as far as possible from the salt-laden air that had begun to taste too sharp. Yet others remained, for the sea was the only thing they truly understood. They continued their lives, drawing fish, mending nets, teaching their children not to stare too long into the water. Meanwhile, on certain nights, the elders gathered around small fires, retelling the story of the great flood that had occurred before time began. They no longer knew which parts were legend and which were truth. In the silence between the tale and the fire's glow, a soft sound could be heard, like the long breath of a sleeping sea. Everyone who heard it fell silent, for they knew that within that quiet, the lost world was still breathing gently beneath their feet. That night, the air felt unbearably heavy, as if every molecule carried unfinished memories. The waves no longer moved in their usual rhythm, but pulsed slowly. Following a beat that could not be heard yet, was felt within the chest. In the distance, the sky above the sea flickered faintly, as though something was trying to pierce the thin veil between the human world and something far older. Amid the stillness, a faint light began to appear beneath the water's surface, forming a widening circle that grew brighter and brighter, as if the ocean floor was remembering its own shape. Fishermen, watching from the shore, knelt without knowing why, their bodies trembling with a feeling beyond explanation, not fear, not awe, but something between the two. Something that made time hold its breath. The sea rose quietly, without roaring or crashing, moving calmly, touching their feet like a cold but gentle hand. From within, that light emerged, a form that could not be called a creature nor a shadow, only a presence trembling like a reflection from another realm. It drifted slowly toward the shore, then stopped, as if listening to the earth. The air shifted, carrying the mingled scent of salt and metal, strange yet alluring. The children watching from afar felt their hearts pulsing with the same rhythm as the light. Inside them, something faintly glowed, like a memory from a time they had never lived. When the luminous form faded, the sea grew still again. Yet on the sand where it had stood, a strange symbol remained, one that could not be erased no matter how many times the waves returned. The people could only gaze at it in silence, realizing that whatever had happened that night was not merely an event, but a message from something that had waited far too long to be remembered. The next morning arrived with a tender and silent light. The sea looked like a sheet of freshly cleaned glass, no ripples. No birds, no signs of life, except the faint shimmer still trembling beneath its surface. People woke without speaking, as though the night before still lingered in the air, something too vast to be put into words. On the damp sand, the glowing symbol had begun to sink slowly into the earth, fading but never truly gone. Some swore they could still see it when they closed their eyes, etched behind their eyelids like a light that lived inside their minds. In the small houses by the shore, children sat quietly, watching the sea that no longer felt the same. They did not know why their hearts felt full, as if they had just lost something they had never possessed. The old woman who once spoke of stories before the flood sat on her porch, gazing at the horizon as it blurred. She knew, without knowing how, that the world had shifted its course gently, almost soundlessly. In that stillness, she closed her eyes, letting her breath follow the rhythm of the sea, returning to calm. She understood that this story would never be written, never taught, never sung. It would drift like mist between eras, waiting for thousands of years until someone found another fragment of this memory and named it, again in a language not yet born. As the sun slowly descended, its final light fell upon the sea, turning its entire surface to gold. Beneath that glow, one could feel that everything sand, air, human flesh, even shadow had become part of the same current. There were no longer clear borders between what was real and what was remembered, between what existed and what was lost. The world turned quietly, like a long breath finally reaching its end. In the air lingered a faint echo of something that once spoke without sound and departed without a name. Night returned, not dark, not bright, but soft, like a petal closing slowly. In the distance, the sea breathed once more, and the wind carried a whisper that sounded like a song without melody. No one knew whether it was a farewell or a beginning. No one wrote it down. No one marked the date. Only the world knew that something had ended beautifully, and something new had been born in silence. The last light from the sea slowly faded, yet lived on in the human heart as a pulse that would never die. Those who felt it knew, though they did not understand, that the great story had not ended here, only rested. Like all things truly eternal, it was not gone yet, merely waited to be remembered again by another age.